Chapter 4. I thought I was going to the White House. When the President of the United States comes by and says, "Let's hang," you figure you're heading for Oreos in the Oval Office. This turned out not to be the case. The President had dropped by to convince me and my mom that I should go along with the Secret Service guys, but he had more important things to do than deal with me. Our destination was Camp David, which is not as exciting as the White House, but still pretty impressive. How many people do you know who have been to Camp David? Yeah, that's what I thought. We passed through several checkpoints and drove down narrow streets, dense with groves of wintry, leafless trees that looked spooky in the dark. We finally parked outside a large building that was more hunting cabin-y than I would have imagined. The agents led me inside and through rooms that looked like they'd been designed by extremely wealthy pioneers, and brought me to a less rustic-looking office. The severe State Department woman, Nora Price, was sitting behind a desk waiting for me. Or rather, she was there when I entered, and proceeded to ignore me so she could work and I could watch her do it. I stood across from her while she typed away furiously on her laptop. The Secret Service agents had already retreated. Finally, without looking up, she gestured with a flick of her crimson fingernails for me to sit down in one of the heavy wooden chairs. The endless clack-clack-clack of her fingers on the keyboard didn't slow, but after about 5 minutes she said, "I'm sure you're wondering why you've been invited here." You know, I am wondering about that. The sarcasm was a sure sign of my growing impatience. She sighed and pushed herself away from the computer. "I could explain to you, but you would never believe me." "Maybe you could try," I suggested. "Otherwise, I'll end up sitting and watching you type for a long time." I was getting the impression that she didn't like kids in general, or me in particular. She stared at me for a long time, as if wishing I would vanish. When I didn't, she offered one final, long-suffering sigh, stood up, and walked over to my side of the desk. I now saw she was holding a cylinder, about 4 inches long and an inch in diameter. It appeared to be made out of some kind of dull black metal, smooth and without distinguishable features. Without asking my permission, she pressed one end of it to the back of my hand. It let out a little humming noise, and a slightly warm feeling bloomed across my skin. What was that? I rubbed my hand, but the warmth was already gone. I felt perfectly normal. Mrs. Price returned to her seat. "I've just injected you with nanites. Those are—" "I know what nanites are," I said, feeling dizzy, though I didn't know if it was from the injection or the knowledge that I now had something top secret and probably insufficiently tested in my blood. "Impressive," she said, though she sounded more irritated than impressed. "I didn't." "Nanotechnology is pretty common in a lot of sci-fi," I explained. She waved her hand to indicate that the conversation was going places she didn't much like. "I didn't give you permission to inject me with anything," I told her, "and I didn't see my mother sign a consent form." She pressed her lips together. "You could always complain about being exposed to technology that's not supposed to exist, and which no doctor in the world will be able to detect, but I'm not sure that would get you very far." "That's a fair point," I admitted. "What do these nanites do exactly?" "Nanites are, in effect, machines built on molecular levels. They're still experimental as far as practical application in the real world goes, but in science fiction they can be used to augment natural human ability, increase brain function, cure diseases, impart information directly into my brain, turn skin into armor, limbs into weapons, change the shape of your body or face, just about anything imaginable. I'd always loved the idea in theory. I didn't know that I loved the idea of having them in me right now, especially since I didn't know what they were up to." "The nanites will help you communicate," Mrs. Price said with less enthusiasm than the subject of advanced and invasive technology seemed to deserve. This was starting to sound creepy. I didn't know that I wanted machines in my brain. "Communicate what?" I asked. "Ezekiel, there's no way to prepare you for what I'm going to tell you, so I might as well say it outright. For the past week, several nations of this world have been negotiating with a representative of a vast network of alien species. They're considering admitting our world on a provisional basis
into their alliance, and the first step is for us to send 4 young people chosen by the aliens to one of their cultural hubs. Our worth as a species will be measured by the behavior of this small group. However improbable, you have been chosen to be a part of this process."
I stared at her. She had to be messing with me, but this woman looked like she had no direct experience with the concept known as humor. She shook her head in apparent sadness.
"I know it's hard to believe."
She pressed an intercom button on her phone.
"Tell the representative we're ready for him."
I was about to ask her something, but whatever my question was, it froze in my throat because a giraffe in a business suit had just entered the room. Up to his shoulders he had the frame of a pretty normal man, but then, exploding out of his collar were 2 feet of heavily muscled neck, covered by short, nut brown fur. Then there was the giraffe head, with a long snout, large ears, and 2 stubby protrusions sticking out from above the forehead. The suit was charcoal gray and nicely tailored. The giraffe creature had an impeccably folded white handkerchief in his front pocket, which I thought was weird. Technically, he was not really a giraffe. For one thing, he didn't have giraffe markings, and for another, he walked on 2 legs and wore a suit. Also, he spoke, which was not something you generally expect of a giraffe. "Hello," he said. "I'm Dr. Roop." He stuck out his hand for me to shake. In something of a daze, I shook. The creature had tapered hands with long, narrow fingers, and they were covered with the same brownish fur. But otherwise, they looked a whole lot like they could be human. He also had a firm handshake, and he met my eye, so if necessary, I feel like I could trust him to sell me a used car. "You must be Ezekiel Reynolds," he said. His accent sounded vaguely European, which surprised me. To my knowledge, giraffe men are not native to Europe. "Yeah," I managed, and I thought I was extremely articulate under the circumstances. My neck was already hurting from this conversation. Up to the shoulders he was normal person size, but with the neck, the total package was close to about 8 feet. "I understand this is difficult for you," he said, "and I can think of nothing to make it less so, so we might as well jump right in." "Sure," I agreed. "That sounds like a plan." The giraffe guy gestured for me to sit, and so I did. He sat across from me, cross-legged, and adjusted his tie. "I work," he began, "for the Department of Sentient Integration, a branch of the Coalition of Central Governing Committees of the Confederation of United Planets. We are a vast alliance of species native to our section of the galactic spiral. From time to time, when our selection committee has identified 4 qualified worlds, we recruit new species who have achieved certain cultural and technological milestones. From each species, we identify 4 young beings who possess skills or attributes admired in our culture, and request that they spend a standard year with us so that we may evaluate them and determine if their culture is a good fit for our own, and if ours is a good fit for them. The honorable members of the selection committee have picked 4 beings from your planet, and you, Ezekiel, are one of them." I said nothing for a long time. Mrs. Price stared at me like I was an idiot, which coincidentally I felt like. Dr. Roop widened his big yellow eyes slightly as the clock ticked on. Finally, I thought of something to say. "Is this a joke?" As soon as I said it, I realized this question might not suggest I was the absolute best the human race had to offer. Mrs. Price breathed in sharply through her nose, as if the question caused her pain.
"Ezekiel, I assure you that the President is far too busy to play pranks on an irrelevant 12-year-old.
I realized the joke theory wasn't holding up under scrutiny. For now, I was willing to run with the idea that this giraffe guy was an alien. Even so, I had some questions. "Dr. Roop," I started.
"Please," he said, waving a furry hand. "There's no need to be so formal. Call me klhkkkkloplkkkuiv."
No, I said. "I'm not gonna do that." His name kind of sounded like he was choking on a fishbone. "Look, I'm confused, and also freaked out, but we'll deal with the confusion first. I mean, this Confederation of United Planets sounds an awful lot like the United Federation of Planets, which is from a TV show. You can see why I have a hard time buying it."
"Certainly," he said, spreading his fingers in the Vulcan salute. "Star Trek. I find it charming. You see, Zeke, for many decades we've known Earth to be a strong candidate for the Confederation membership, and in accordance with our long-standing practice, we have used certain back channels to filter facts about the wider galaxy into your speculative narratives."
You're telling me that sci-fi is influenced by actual fact?
Some of it, yes.
And there's really a government of peaceful and benevolent aliens out there?
Yes,
he said. And ships that can travel between stars without being limited by the laws of physics?
As you understand those laws, absolutely.
And we're talking, and your mouth doesn't really seem suited to make words in our language, so there must be some kind of universal translator?
Mrs. Price injected you with the appropriate nanites before our meeting. They are able to process and interpret virtually any language, spoken or written, and in most cases do so instantaneously.
Then why do you sound like you have a French accent?
Dutch,
Mrs. Price said.
He sounds Dutch. On occasion, the translator will find analogues from our own linguistic experience to help convey certain cultural inflections.
But, I said, it looks like you're speaking English. I could read your lips.
It's an illusion created by the nanites. Otherwise, the discontinuity between a being's words and the movements might prove jarring. The translator function will also provide equivalents of non-linguistic noises, such as laughter and sighs. Body language you'll have to figure out on your own, though.
Wow. Okay.
You may also, on occasion, detect a slight delay in translation when the system attempts to find a familiar equivalent in your language that opts instead to provide an explanatory wording. Like if I mentioned a type of food native to my planet, such as
spiny leaves with dried fruit.
Or perhaps an unfamiliar alien custom, such as
the ritualistic hair coiffing of the herd tenders.
You'll notice the difference in my voice.
Yeah, I said, for sure. It was hard to describe, but when he said those things, the voice sounded slightly slower, like it was vibrating, but not exactly. It was more of a feeling, and I understood that I was getting a rough equivalent, and there was kind of a mental pause and rush, like if a video playback had a glitch and then caused it to slow, and then it hurried ahead to catch up. That's cool. Wait, did you just get that weird sensation when I said cool?
I received the relevant cultural equivalent to whatever word you used.
I couldn't get my head around all this. Not really. This dapper giraffe in a suit, who spoke with a Dutch accent, was a real alien, born on another planet full of giraffe people, who had access to incredible technology, and who was all real. What else is out there? I asked.
There are too many things to list, so perhaps you should tell me what you're curious about,
Dr. Roops suggested amiably. He tilted his head to one side, but having just been told that I wasn't going to get help on body language, I had no idea what it meant. I thought for a second. Are there, I don't know, space pirates?
Some, not many.
He lowered his neck in a gesture that I felt sure meant something among his own kind. A shrug, maybe?
Our peace officers tried to make piracy an unappealing option.
Mysterious elder aliens and extinct races?
Oh, yes.
His eyes widened. Teleportation?
Only on a subatomic level, he said. Much of the defense technology we possess depends on what amounts to, for all practical purposes, quantum-level teleportation. The process can be done on a larger scale, but requires vast amounts of energy, and the only way to teleport a living being is to destroy it and recreate an identical facsimile. Most beings choose not to experiment with the process.
Yeah, I can see why. How about time travel? He cocked his head slightly.
I'm not at liberty to discuss that subject.
That was a yes, I decided. Can I transfer my consciousness into an avatar?
It can be done, he said, but the side effects include shortness of breath and explosive diarrhea. It's much easier simply to reshape your existing body.
How about the Force and Jedi powers? Are they real?
No, Dr. Roops said. That would be silly.